I want to start this deep dive by asking you a question, and I want you, the listener, to really sit with this, even if it makes you squirm just a little bit.
Right. The uncomfortable questions are always the best ones.
Exactly. So imagine, just for a moment, that you possessed a magic ring. And not just, a fancy piece of jewelry, but a ring that made you completely, utterly invisible.
Like total invisibility. No traces, no footprints, no thermal imaging picking you up. You
Yeah.
just become a ghost in the waking world.
A total ghost. And here is the real kicker, right? With absolute 100% certainty that you would never, ever get caught for anything you did while wearing it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, the normal consequences of society, like the
Hmm.
police, the courts, the judgment of your peers, they simply no longer apply to you. So here's the really uncomfortable question. If you had that ring and you knew you'd never face a single consequence, would you still follow the rules?
Well, that's heavy.
Right. Would you still be a so-called good person?
I mean, it is the ultimate stress test of human character
Hmm.
because it completely strips away all the external societal scaffolding that props up our good behavior.
Yeah, the stuff that keeps us in line.
Exactly. It removes the fear of prison, the desire for a glowing reputation, the worry about what our neighbors or our families might whisper about us behind closed doors.
Which is a lot of what drives us, honestly.
It is. It leaves you entirely alone with your own internal compass. And it forces this terrifying self-audit. Like,
Uh,
am I acting justly because I actually value justice, or am I just terrified of the punishment for acting unjustly?
and if we are being completely brutally honest with ourselves, the answers we whisper in the dark aren't always pretty.
Definitely not.
We might think, well, maybe I'd just steal a little bit of money from a massive corporation that wouldn't miss it. But then, where does it stop?
Right, the slippery slope.
Yeah, and that tension, that exact discomfort is the launch pad for our mission today. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking a stack of translated excerpts from one of the most foundational, influential, and honestly, hotly debated texts in the history of human thought.
Plato's Republic, or as it was originally known, the Politeia.
Exactly. And we are not here to give you a dry academic history lesson. The goal is to strip away all the centuries of museum dust that has settled on this text over the years.
Yeah, we really want to look at the raw, pulsating arguments about what it actually means to be a just person.
Hmm.
And, whether being good is actually good for you or if it's just a scam invented by the weak.
So let's frame this up for the listener. We are embarking on what is essentially a philosophical detective story today. We're going to start with a fiery, aggressive debate about power, corruption, and who really makes the rules.
And we're going to put human nature on trial using that exact magic ring of invisibility you mentioned.
Right. And when things get incredibly complicated, we're going to try to solve the mystery of the human mind by building a massive hypothetical city from scratch.
We'll confront a terrifying mythical beast living inside us, and ultimately take a very painful journey out of a dark, subterranean cave.
It's a massive intellectual journey. And the questions this text wrestles with are fiercely urgent today. I mean, this isn't just about ancient Greeks in togas debating in a courtyard.
No, not at all. This is about your own mind, your own motivations, and your own daily choices.
Yeah.
It is about understanding the secret to finding internal harmony in a world that, quite frankly, often feels entirely rigged and chaotic.
Completely. So I want to set the scene because the setting of this dialogue is actually incredibly important to the mood. We are in the Piraeus.
Right, the port city.
Yeah, the bustling port city just outside of Athens. It is loud, it is crowded, there's a huge festival happening for a new foreign goddess. It's a place of commerce, diverse cultures, sailors, and merchants. It's messy.
A real melting pot.
Exactly. And Socrates has gone down there with some friends to pray and watch a parade. They're trying to head back up to the calm, orderly city of Athens, but they playfully cornered by a group of guys.
Right, including a young man named Polemarchos.
Yeah, and Polemarchus essentially refuses to let them leave and insists they come back to his house.
The contrast there is just brilliant. You have Socrates, the philosopher of order and logic, getting dragged into the chaotic, wealthy, worldly port.
It's a great setup.
And when they finally arrive at the house, Socrates finds Polemarchus' father, an elderly, wealthy arms manufacturer named Kephalos.
An arms manufacturer, right, so he's done well for himself.
Oh, very well. Kephalos is sitting there on a cushion wearing a wreath because he's just been performing a religious sacrifice. He really represents the old guard.
The establishment.
Exactly. He is the embodiment of traditional, conventional morality and the comfort of inherited wealth. And Socrates, being his usual probing self, immediately starts questioning the old man about what it is like to be nearing the end of life.
And more pointedly, what the real value of having all that money actually is.
Right, and Kephalos gives a surprisingly candid answer. He says that a lot of guys his age complain because they miss the wild parties, the drinking, and the intense physical pleasures of their youth.
Sure, the glory days.
But Kephalos takes a different angle. He says getting old is actually like being freed from a crazy, tyrannical master. The raging hormones and desires fade, and you finally get some peace and quiet in your own head.
That's actually a really nice way to look at aging.
It is. But then he addresses the money. He says the greatest thing about being rich isn't buying luxury items. It's the fact that wealth allows you to avoid doing bad things out of desperation.
Okay, interesting. So money buys you morality.
In a way, yeah. Kephalos points out that when you get close to death, those old myths about the underworld, the stories of punishment for the wicked, they start to keep you awake at night.
You start sweating a little bit about your track record.
Exactly. You start doing a moral inventory. You wonder, did I cheat anyone? Did I lie? Do I owe a sacrifice to a god? Or maybe money to a business partner?
So his view of justice is deeply transactional.
100%. To Kephalos, being just simply means telling the truth and paying your debts. If you do that, and you have the capital to ensure you can always balance your ledger, you get to die with a clear conscience.
It's very neat and tidy. You owe $10, you pay $10, you accidentally broke a window, you pay for the window, boom, you're a just person.
Right, it's an accountant's view of morality.
It makes me think of modern billionaires who build massive empires, maybe cut a few corners, but then pivot to philanthropy later in life, writing massive checks to balance the cosmic scales.
That's a perfect modern parallel.
But Socrates immediately throws a wrench into this transactional view of morality. He uses a brilliant, simple analogy. He says, imagine a friend lends you his weapons when he is perfectly sane. But later, this friend suffers a psychotic break. He goes completely out of his mind, he is raging, and he comes to your door demanding his weapons back. Are you supposed to give them to him?
Well, the obvious, visceral answer is no. Giving a weapon to a madman is a catastrophic idea, even if the weapon is technically his property.
Right.
And you probably shouldn't tell him the whole truth about where the weapons are hidden either.
Exactly. So Socrates elegantly proves that justice cannot simply be reduced to telling the truth and returning what is owed. The context matters deeply. The outcome matters.
Morality isn't just an accounting trick.
No, it's not. And Kephalos, who is getting tired and really just wants to get back to his comfortable religious sacrifices, gracefully bows out of the conversation.
He literally leaves the room.
Yeah, he leaves his son Polemarchos to defend the family honor and the traditional view of justice.
So Polemarchos steps into the ring, and he appeals to authority. He borrows a definition from a famous, respected poet of the time, Simonides. Polemarchos claims that justice means giving to each person what is appropriate or what is owed to them.
Which sounds nice and vague.
Right, so Socrates pushes him to translate that poetry into practical reality. And Polemarchos lays down a rule that is going to sound incredibly familiar to anyone scrolling through social media or watching cable news today.
Yeah, no, this one.
He says justice means helping your friends and harming your enemies.
Wow. It is the ultimate definition of tribalism. It is the mobster's code, the partisan political code, the cutthroat corporate warfare code.
Completely. You protect your in-group, you reward your loyalists, and you ruthlessly crush the out-group, your competitors.
It feels very intuitive to our baseline evolutionary psychology, right? You secure your tribe.
It does. But Socrates starts dismantling this piece by piece. His first angle of attack is epistemic meaning. It's about what we can actually know.
Okay, lay that out for me.
He asks Polemarchos, how do we know who our true friends are? Human beings are notoriously terrible judges of character. We often think someone is a great person and a loyal friend, but they are secretly undermining us.
Oh, absolutely.
Conversely, we might think someone is a bitter enemy because they disagree with us. But they are actually a person of deep integrity.
So our perception is totally flawed.
Right. So if we blindly follow Polemarchos' rule, we're going to end up helping bad people and harming good people, which seems entirely unjust.
Okay, so that's a huge problem with the rule right out of the gate.
And Socrates then takes it a step further, diving into the actual nature of virtue itself. This is where the logic gets really tight. He asks Polemarchus to consider animal husbandry.
Animal husbandry.
Yeah, like raising animals. If you harm a horse, does it become a better horse or a worse horse?
Well, it becomes worse, obviously.
Right, specifically in terms of its virtues as a horse, like its strength, its speed, its temperament.
Yeah.
If you harm a dog, it becomes a worse dog. It becomes meaner or more fearful.
Yeah, that tracks.
So Socrates proposes, if you harm a human being, don't they inevitably become worse in terms of human virtue? Don't they become more unjust?
Oh, let's pause there because that is a massive pivot. He's cornering him by pointing out that if justice is a human virtue, a fundamentally good quality, how can you possibly use a good quality to make someone else worse?
Exactly. That is the logical contradiction at the heart of tribal justice. Socrates points out that heat cannot produce cold. Dryness cannot produce moisture. It defies their very nature.
So the good cannot produce harm.
Precisely. A truly just person cannot use their justice to inflict harm and make another person more unjust. It goes against the very essence of what the virtue is. Justice cannot be the tool of injury, not even to a bitter enemy.
I am with you on the logic, but I can imagine sitting in that room, being a tough, worldly guy from the port, and thinking Socrates is just playing cute little word games.
Oh, absolutely.
And the text actually reflects that exact frustration. Right as Socrates is dismantling this tribal view, the atmosphere in the room completely shatters.
This is one of the most dramatic moments in philosophy.
There's a guy named Thrasymachos who has been sitting there listening, and he physically cannot take it anymore. The text describes him coiling himself up and leaping into the conversation like a wild beast, ready to tear them apart.
He is furious.
He thinks Socrates is a fraud, just dodging the harsh realities of how the world actually works.
Yeah, Thrasymachos represents raw, unfiltered cynicism. He is the voice of realpolitik. He yells at Socrates, demanding he stop asking coy questions and actually define justice himself.
He wants Socrates to stop playing defense.
Exactly. And when Thrasymachos finally takes the floor to give his own definition, he drops a hammer on the entire room. He declares, justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger.
Wow. Thrasymachos sounds like he could be hosting a cynical political talk show today. He's basically saying, wake up, sheeple, the game is rigged.
That is exactly his point.
He argues that the people in power, the rulers, the tyrants, the wealthy elite, they make the laws for one reason only, to benefit themselves. If you are in a democracy, the laws benefit the democratic majority. If you are in a tyranny, the laws benefit the tyrant. And then these rulers have the audacity to label those self-serving laws as justice, and they punish anyone who disobeys them as a criminal.
It's a very dark view.
So the just man, the guy diligently following the rules and paying his taxes, is simply a gullible fool serving the interests of the elite. The strong get rich and the weak get crushed under the boot of this fake morality. Now, we are just conveying what the source material says here, to be clear. We're not taking a side on this deeply cynical view of politics.
Of course. We're just laying out his argument. And it is a brutal, highly compelling view of society. It resonates deeply because history and our daily news cycle is overflowing with examples of exactly this kind of corruption.
Oh, for sure.
Thrasymachos is arguing that morality is nothing but a smokescreen for power. Socrates, however, doesn't get angry. He systematically deconstructs this cynical worldview by analyzing the very definition of what it means to practice an art or a profession.
How does he do that?
He wants to look at what it means to be a ruler in the truest, purest sense.
Wait, I need to push back on that on behalf of Thrasymachos. If you look at a CEO or a modern politician, aren't they naturally looking out for their own bottom line, their own stock options, or their own re-election campaigns? How does Socrates prove that ruling isn't inherently selfish?
Socrates tackles this by using analogies of specialized skills, or what the Greeks called arts. He asks Thrasymachos to look at a physician. Is a true physician one acting strictly according to the art of medicine focused on making money or on healing the sick?
Well, healing the sick.
Right. The art of medicine itself is entirely directed toward the benefit of the patient, who is actually the weaker party in that dynamic. Then he looks at a steersman, the captain of a ship.
Okay.
The art of steering isn't about the captain's personal advantage or comfort. It is entirely about safely guiding the ship and the passengers through a storm.
Okay, I see the maneuver. He's saying the purpose of the skill is to serve the subject of the skill. The doctor serves the patient, the captain serves the crew, the horse trainer serves the horse.
Consider the implications of that for a moment. Socrates argues that no true art or rule seeks its own advantage. It seeks the advantage of the weaker, the person being ruled or cared for.
But what about the fact that doctors do get rich?
Socrates says if a doctor makes a fortune, that is a separate art entirely, the art of wage earning happening alongside the art of medicine.
Ah, I see.
But the art of ruling itself in its pure, uncorrupted form is always directed at the well-being of the ruled. This leads Socrates to a radical conclusion. Good men don't actually want to rule.
Really?
Yeah, they don't seek power for its own sake. They have to be compelled to do it, usually by the greatest penalty of all, the fear of being ruled by someone worse than themselves.
That is a staggering way to look at leadership. If you really want the job of president, maybe that should disqualify you from having it.
That's certainly one way to interpret it.
But here's where the text gets incredibly realistic. Socrates logically backs Thrasymachos into a corner. He makes Thrasymachos contradict himself and admit that justice is a form of wisdom and injustice is a form of ignorance.
He wins the debate on points, essentially.
Right. But Thrasymachos leaves this toxic, lingering poison in the room before he gives up. He insists that, fine, maybe Socrates can win a cute logical debate, but out in the real world, the completely unjust life is simply happier, more profitable, and more powerful than the just life.
The cynical reality check.
Exactly. He says the tyrant who steals an entire country is called happy and blessed, while the petty thief is thrown in jail. Thrasymachos argues that perfect injustice is actually the ultimate life hack because it brings you everything you could ever desire.
And that lingering poison fundamentally changes the entire trajectory of the dialogue.
Yeah.
The listeners in the room, Socrates' followers, aren't fully convinced by Socrates' logical victory.
It feels hollow to them.
Yes, they feel like he won on a technicality, but he hasn't killed the core seductive appeal of Thrasymachos' argument. This forces a massive shift in the deep dive. We're no longer just asking what justice is. We are now forced to confront a much deeper existential question. Why should we bother with it at all? Why be good in a world that seemingly rewards the ruthless and the wicked?
Which brings a new character to the forefront, Glaucon. Glaucon is Plato's real-life brother, and he steps up and essentially calls Socrates out. He says, Socrates, do you want to seem to have persuaded us, or do you want to actually persuade us?
A great challenge.
Glaucon wants Socrates to prove that justice is a good thing in and of itself. He wants to strip away all the external rewards, take away the good reputation, the honors, the wealth, the likes on social media, the networking benefits of being seen as a good guy. Prove to me that just having a just soul is inherently better than having an unjust one.
Glaucon sets up a monumental challenge here. He decides to play devil's advocate and present the absolute strongest possible case for injustice, just so Socrates can definitively crush it.
He's steelmanning the argument.
Exactly. To do this, Glaucon starts by offering a dark, pragmatic theory on the origin of justice. Long before modern philosophers like Thomas Hobbes or Jean-Jacques Rousseau talked about the social contract, Glaucon lays the blueprint out right here.
Let's explore that origin story. Glaucon argues that, by our very nature, human beings believe that doing whatever you want, committing injustice, making what isn't yours, is a great good.
Right.
And suffering injustice, having things taken from you, is a terrible evil. But the pain of suffering wrong is vastly greater than the pleasure of doing it. Because we are all relatively equal in our physical vulnerability, we quickly realize we can't get away with doing whatever we want without eventually getting crushed by someone bigger or a mob of people we've angered.
We'd all just destroy each other.
So what do? We make a compromise.
We forge a pact out of mutual terror. Glaucon argues that justice is merely a social contract created by the weak to protect themselves from each other.
Just to survive.
We agree on laws, we establish courts, not because we inherently love goodness or virtue, but because we are terrified of being victims. Justice is the mediocre middle ground between the best possible scenario doing wrong with absolute impunity and the worst possible scenario suffering wrong without any power to get revenge.
It's damage control.
Therefore, people only act justly because they have to, not because they want to.
Yeah.
If you gave anyone the power to bypass the consequences, they would instantly abandon justice.
And to prove this cynical point, to prove that no one is naturally, willingly just, Glaucon unleashes the allegory of the Ring of Gyges. This is the thought experiment I brought up at the very beginning of our dive.
It's a brilliant, haunting story.
It's a story that has echoed through literature forever. You can see its direct DNA in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man. It is a profound psychological diagnostic tool. Let me paint the picture of this myth.
Please do. It's a striking and eerie narrative that gets right to the core of human motivation.
So there is this shepherd He's an ancestor of a man named Gyges, and he works for the king of Lydia. He's just a regular guy, doing a regular job. One day, a massive rainstorm rolls in, followed by a violent earthquake.
A literal disruption of his normal world.
Right. The ground literally splits open right where he is tending his sheep, revealing a deep, terrifying chasm. He climbs down into this abyss and finds incredible, mythic things that defy explanation.
Like what?
He sees a hollow bronze horse with little doors in the side of it. He peeks inside these doors, and there's the corpse of a giant, a being far larger than a normal human. And this giant has nothing on his body, no clothes, no armor, except for a single gold ring on its finger.
Notice the detail of the giant. It highlights how ancient, alien, and unnatural this power is. It doesn't belong to the normal human realm of laws and societal norms.
That's a great point. So the shepherd slips the ring off the corpse and climbs back out of the earth. Later, he goes to the monthly gathering of the shepherds to give their flock report to the king's overseers. He's sitting around the fire with the others, and he happens to idly twist the setting of the ring inward toward his palm.
And then?
Suddenly, the other shepherds start talking about him as if he has left the room. He has become completely invisible. He is stunned. He twists the setting outward, and boom, he materializes again. He tests it a few times. Inward, invisible, outward, visible. He has a switch that turns off the judgment of the world.
He has discovered absolute freedom from consequence. The gaze of society, the panopticon that keeps us all in line, has been entirely removed from him.
So what does this average, presumably just shepherd, do with this absolute freedom? Does he become an ancient superhero? Does he steal bread to feed the poor?
I'm guessing no.
No. The text says he immediately maneuvers to become one of the messengers sent to the king's court. Once he's inside the palace, he uses his invisibility to seduce the queen. With her help, he murders the king and seizes the entire kingdom. He takes everything he desires because literally nothing can stop him.
And this is where Glaucon drops the hammer on Socrates. Glaucon argues that if you took two of these rings and you gave one to a supposedly just man and one to an unjust man, their paths would eventually converge.
They'd end up in the exact same place.
They would both end up doing the exact same things. Glaucon says that no one has a will of iron strong enough to stay on the path of justice, to keep their hands off other people's property, or to resist taking whatever they want from the marketplace or entering houses and doing whatever they please when they have the power of a god among mortals.
The implication is terrifying. Morality is just a construct of visibility.
If people can't see you, your morality vanishes like smoke. But Glaucon doesn't even stop there. He is ruthless in his logic. He pushes the thought experiment to its absolute most brutal extreme to force Socrates to defend the bare essence of justice.
How far does he push it?
He says, we have to compare the two lives, the just and the unjust in their purest, most unadulterated forms.
The ultimate contrast. The perfectly unjust man versus the perfectly just man. We have to isolate the variables.
Right. So first, Glaucon says, let's construct the perfectly unjust man. This guy is a master of deceit. He commits massive crimes. He steals. He manipulates. He ruins lives.
But no one knows.
Exactly. He is so incredibly skilled at the art of injustice that he maintains a flawless public reputation as a saint. Because he is wealthy from all his hidden crimes, he can afford to buy friends, bribe politicians, hire the best PR firms, and even offer the most lavish, magnificent sacrifices to the gods, so the gods love him too.
So he wins on every level.
He gets all the material benefits of injustice and all the social rewards of a good reputation. He is wildly successful, rich, and universally beloved.
And now, Glaucon says, stand him next to the perfectly just man, a man who is truly, deeply good in his soul, but who doesn't care a bit about the appearance of being good.
Right.
In fact, to truly test him, to make sure he isn't just being good for the applause, we must strip away everything except his internal virtue. We must give this perfectly good man the worst possible reputation. Society must firmly believe he is a monster.
And the text is unflinching about what happens to this guy. Because society believes he is the ultimate villain. The perfectly just man is shunned. He is impoverished. He is dragged through the mud.
It gets violent, too.
Very. He is whipped. He is physically tortured on the rack. His eyes are burned out. And finally, after suffering every conceivable agony, he is crucified. Yet through all of this torment, he never breaks. He remains truly, internally just.
It is a horrifying, almost unbearable image. It pushes the boundaries of what we can even comprehend as a good life.
It really does.
I have to say, this is where my mind just short circuits. Glaucon and his brother Adamantos are looking at Socrates and saying, all right, Socrates, prove to us that the tortured, blinded, crucified good guy is somehow happier and better off than the wealthy, beloved, successful bad guy.
It seems impossible.
That seems like an entirely impossible task. How can Socrates possibly defend the tortured just man? How can he prove that having a just soul is worth all of that agony?
It is the ultimate philosophical corner to be backed into. If Socrates tries to answer this by simply looking at the individual human in isolation, he will fail. The human soul is too complex, too microscopic, and the definitions of happiness and virtue are too blurry at that scale.
So what's his move?
Socrates proposes a massive methodological shift. He uses an analogy to explain his new approach. He says, imagine you are slightly short-sighted, and someone asks you to read very small letters written on a wall from a distance.
You'd struggle, you'd be squinting and guessing.
But what if you knew that those same exact letters were written elsewhere, in a much larger font, on a massive billboard? You would obviously read the large letters first to understand what it says, and then go back to check the small letters to confirm they match.
Okay, so he wants to blow up the font size of the problem. He needs a bigger canvas.
Exactly the right way to think about it. He says, let's stop squinting at the microscopic individual for a moment. Let's zoom out and build a macro model. Let's look at justice on the scale of an entire city or a state.
Okay, that's a huge shift.
If we could theoretically watch a hypothetical city come into existence from scratch, step by step, we can observe where justice and injustice actually originate in that larger structure. Once we map it on the macro level of the city, we could take that map, shrink it down, and apply it back to the micro level of the individual human soul.
The decompose and distill philosophy.
That's right.
That is a brilliant pivot. So Socrates starts this massive thought experiment. He says a city comes into existence for a very simple, practical reason. No individual is self-sufficient.
We need each other.
Right. We all have a multitude of baseline needs just to survive. We need food, shelter, clothing. So people gather together in one settlement to help each other out as partners and helpers.
And immediately, right at the foundation, Socrates establishes a rule for this ideal city, a rule that will govern everything that follows, the rule of specialization.
What does that entail?
He argues that people are born with different natural aptitudes. Therefore, things will be produced better, in greater quantity, and far more easily if each person does one job, the job they are naturally suited for, and does it at the right time, freeing them from having to juggle other tasks.
The farmer shouldn't be wasting time trying to forge his own iron plow or cobble his own shoes. The farmer farms, the builder builds, the weaver weaves, and they trade their surplus.
It's highly efficient.
It's a very simple, efficient agrarian society. They produce enough to live, they bake bread, they drink a little wine, they wear simple clothes, and they live in peace. They are even careful not to overpopulate so they don't fall into poverty or trigger a war over resources.
It sounds idyllic, a sort of pastoral, minimalist utopia. But Glaucon interrupts him again. Glaucon is a young, aristocratic Athenian accustomed to the finer things, and he finds this simple city utterly boring and rudimentary.
What does he call it?
He famously mocks it, calling it a city of pigs. He says people don't just want basic, rustic survival. They want comfort. They want couches to lie on, tables to eat at, sweet pastries, perfumes, incense, courtesans. They want luxury.
The feverish city. I love this part because it feels so relevant to modern consumerism. Socrates basically sighs and agrees to humor him. He says, okay, we won't just look at a healthy minimalist city. We will look at a luxurious, feverish city.
And that changes everything.
But the moment you introduce endless, unnecessary desires for luxury, you completely destabilize the dynamic of the society. Suddenly, the original borders of your land are too small to support all these new desires. You need massive herds of meat animals. You need resources for gold and ivory and art. You need more laborers. So what happens?
The inevitable consequence of endless desire is expansion. To feed the feverish appetites of its citizens, the city must inevitably bite off a piece of its neighbor's land.
Which means conflict.
And the neighbors will do the very same thing if they too have surrendered to the endless acquisition of wealth. This, Socrates points out, is the origin of war. War is born from the very same desires that produce the greatest evils in society. The insatiable hunger for more.
And because war is now a reality, and because of our golden rule of specialization, one person, one job, the farmers and shoemakers can't just pick up spears and fight effectively.
War is a specialized art.
Exactly. The city needs a dedicated, specialized military and police class. This introduces the most famous and perhaps infamous class in Plato's Republic, the guardians.
The guardians are the fierce protectors of the state. But their introduction creates a massive psychological dilemma.
What's the dilemma?
The text points out that these guardians need to have a specific, almost contradictory nature. They need to be fiercely aggressive, courageous, and physically strong to fight off external enemies. But at the same time, they possess all the weapons and the martial power within the city.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If they're just aggressive killers, what stops them from turning on their own unarmed citizens and enslaving them?
It's the classic problem, who watches the watchman? How do you create a human being who is both a vicious, lethal fighter and a gentle, caring protector?
Socrates uses a fascinating analogy here to explain this paradox. He looks at dogs, he says, look at a well-bred guard dog. To strangers, it is vicious, terrifying, and aggressive. But to the people it knows, the family that feeds it, it is incredibly gentle and loving.
So it categorizes based on familiarity.
Socrates argues that a dog's nature is actually deeply, inherently philosophical. Think about it. A dog determines friend from foe purely based on knowledge. Whether it knows the person or not, it loves what it knows and is hostile to what it doesn't know.
That's a wild way to think about a dog.
Therefore, the guardians must also be lovers of knowledge, lovers of wisdom philosophers. To achieve this delicate, almost impossible balance in a human being, to create citizens who are both fierce and gentle, requires an incredibly strict and rigorous system of education.
Education is the key to preventing the guardians from becoming wolves that devour the flock they were meant to protect.
Exactly right.
And the education system they design is intense and all-encompassing. They insist that education must start with the mind before the body. They start with music, which in the broad Greek sense means literature, poetry, tales, and rhythm, before they move to physical gymnastics.
And here's where I get a little uncomfortable, because we hit one of the most controversial parts of the text: strict, uncompromising censorship.
The censorship of the myths is a jarring concept for modern readers. Socrates argues that young minds are entirely impressionable. They're like soft clay taking a stamp.
You cannot let children hear just any story.
Right, especially stories that depict bad behavior, because they will internalize those values as normal. He specifically targets the greatest cultural touchstones of the time, the poets Homer and Hesiod.
He literally wants to ban the classic myths. He says you can't tell stories about the gods fighting each other, betraying each other, plotting, or changing shapes to trick humans.
Why? Because if the gods, who are supposed to be the ultimate role models, are behaving like deceitful, warring, jealous politicians, how can you expect the youth of the city to value honesty and unity?
It makes sense logically, even if it feels restrictive.
The rule is laid down like a law of physics. The divine is good, and therefore cannot be the cause of evil. The divine is perfect, and therefore does not change shape or lie. The stories told to the young guardians must only promote courage, truthfulness, and self-control. No weeping heroes, no terrifying descriptions of the underworld that might make them fear death in battle.
It is a radical proposition. Socrates is treating culture and media as the primary, most powerful tools for shaping the psychological architecture of the citizens. It's an ancient acknowledgement that the media we consume shapes our reality.
So once this extensive, highly curated educational system is in place and the city is fully constructed, we see it naturally stratify into 3 distinct classes based on their natural aptitudes and the roles they are suited for.
Let's lay out that class structure. First, we have the rulers, who are chosen from the very best, most tested of the guardians. They are the ones who possess true wisdom and care most about the city.
The philosopher kings, eventually.
Second, we have the auxiliaries, the younger military guardians who act as the enforcers and possess immense courage. And third, we have the producers, the massive class of farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who provide the material needs and wealth of the city.
We have successfully built the macro model. The large letters are written clearly on the board. Now, Socrates says, let's look at the city we've built and try to locate where justice actually resides.
They easily identify wisdom in the rulers, courage in the guardian auxiliaries, and moderation or self-control in the agreement among all 3 classes that the wise should be the ones to rule.
But what is justice? Where is it hiding?
This is the ultimate aha moment of the thought experiment. Socrates realizes that justice was right in front of them the whole time, baked into the very foundation.
The specialization.
Yes. Justice in the city is simply the original principle they founded it on. Everyone doing their own specific job and not interfering with the jobs of others. The producers produce, the guardians guard, the rulers rule. Justice isn't a specific law or an action. It is the structural harmony of the entire system functioning as it was designed.
And now comes the crucial, breathtaking pivot. We take this massive map of the city and lay it directly over the individual human mind. Socrates argues that the human soul is not a single, unified, indivisible blob.
No, it is fundamentally divided. It has distinct parts that can and do conflict with each other.
But wait, how does he prove that? I feel like one person. I don't feel like a city with different factions running around inside my head.
He proves it using the principle of non-contradiction. He says, imagine a person who is incredibly thirsty. They desperately want to drink, but they know the water in front of them is poisoned, or they are fasting for medical reasons, so they force themselves not to drink.
Okay, I felt that conflict before.
The sane part of the soul cannot simultaneously push toward an object, desiring the drink, and pull away from the same object, refusing the drink. Therefore, there must be at least two distinct parts of the mind at work. One part is the irrational desire, and the other part is the calculating reason telling it no.
That makes perfect sense. And he ultimately identifies three parts of the soul, perfectly mirroring the three classes of our hypothetical city. First, there is reason, the ruling part.
It loves learning, it seeks truth, and it calculates what is best for the whole person, past, present, and future. This matches the rulers in the city.
Second, there is the appetite, the producing part. This is by far the largest part of the soul, driven by primal, insatiable desires for food, drink, sex, and the money needed to acquire them. This matches the massive producer class. But what is the third part?
The third part is what the Greeks called thymos, often translated as spirit. This is the part that loves honor and victory. It is the part that feels righteous indignation and flashes of anger at injustice.
I always struggle with spirit. How is anger different from an appetite or an emotion? Why isn't it just part of the desiring blob?
It's a great question. Socrates argues that spirit is distinct from appetite because you can actually get angry at your own appetites. Imagine you succumb to a base desire, something you know you shouldn't do. Afterwards, you feel disgusted with yourself. You berate yourself.
The guilt trip.
Exactly. That anger, that self-reproach is the spirit fighting against the appetite. In a healthy mind, the spirit naturally allies itself with reason to suppress the unruly, chaotic appetites. This perfectly matches the guardian class in the city, the enforcers who help the rulers keep the city orderly.
So, if justice in the city is the three classes doing their own jobs without interfering with each other, the definition of justice in the individual is finally definitively discovered. Justice is not a set of external actions.
It's not about paying your debts or sacrificing to the gods.
Justice is internal harmony. It is a state of supreme psychological health. It is when reason is in charge, making wise, long-term decisions, spirit acts as its brave, energetic enforcer, and the massive, unruly appetite willingly submits to their leadership.
That is the core of it. And injustice, therefore, is a civil war inside the mind. It is a rebellion. It is when the lowest desires stage a violent coup. It is when the appetite or the spirit tries to seize control of the whole soul, dragging the person into impulsive behaviors that destroy their internal balance.
A just person has organized their inner life. They are a true, reliable friend to themselves.
An unjust person is fragmented, chaotic, and fundamentally at war with themselves.
Later in the text, Plato gives us this incredibly striking, almost terrifying piece of imagery to visualize this internal condition. It's the chimera metaphor. He says, imagine a creature made of three distinct parts. First, a massive, multi-headed beast with heads of both tame and wild animals growing all around it. That's the appetite.
Okay, that's a wild image.
Second, a proud, fierce lion. That's the spirit. And third, a tiny little human being. That's reason. Now take all three of these creatures, jam them together, and wrap them up in the outward, fleshy skin of a human being.
From the outside, walking down the street, it just looks like a normal person. But inside, beneath the skin, it is a dangerous menagerie.
Right. So let's bring this all the way back to Book 1 and answer Thrasymachos. When Thrasymachos said that the completely unjust tyrant is the happiest person in the world because he can do whatever he wants, Socrates is basically saying, look at the internal reality.
The tyrant might look powerful on the outside, sitting on a throne, covered in gold, commanding armies.
But inside, he is starving the human. He is starving reason. He is frantically feeding and strengthening the multi-headed beast of appetite and the lion of spirit, and he is letting them bite, drag, and tear each other apart.
He might look like a master to the outside world, but inside his own head, he's being dragged around by a monster.
It is a profound, paradigm-shifting synthesis of the entire argument. Socrates has finally answered Glaucon's challenge. Why be just, even if you have the ring of Gyges, even if you are tortured on the rack? Because injustice ruins the very architecture of your own soul.
The unjust person even if they never get caught, even if they have the ring, is chronically, terminally diseased. They have handed control of their life over to an insatiable, tyrannical beast.
The true advantage of justice is supreme psychological health, freedom, and self-mastery. The just man on the rack is in horrific physical agony, yes, but his soul is intact, luminous, and harmonious.
While the tyrant on the throne is in physical luxury, but his soul is tearing itself to pieces in a state of constant paranoia and unquenchable desire.
That completely flips the script on what power actually is. Power isn't controlling others, it's controlling the menagerie inside yourself. But the text doesn't stop there, because if that tiny human inside us, reason, is going to rule this internal menagerie effectively, it needs to know where it's going.
It needs to be trained to see what is truly good, rather than just chasing the fleeting shadows and illusions that the appetite constantly craves.
How do we train reason so it doesn't get tricked? This leads us to arguably the most famous metaphor in Western philosophy, the allegory of the cave.
The Allegory of the Cave is Plato's profound, cinematic illustration of human education, our natural state of ignorance, and the philosopher's painful journey toward ultimate truth. It builds on the idea that the world we see with our physical eyes, the world of constant change and decay, is not the ultimate reality.
I want to really paint this picture for you, the listener, because the sensory details are what make it so devastating. Imagine a deep, dark, subterranean cave. Inside this cave, there are human beings who have been chained to the floor since the moment they were born.
Bound completely.
Their legs and necks are bound so tightly that they cannot turn their heads even an inch. They can only look straight forward at the blank stone wall of the cave. Behind them, higher up and at a distance, a fire is burning. And between the fire and the prisoners, there is a raised walkway with a low wall, sort of like the screen at a puppet show.
And along this walkway, unseen people are carrying various objects. Statues of humans, animals made of wood and stone holding them up above the low wall. The fire behind them casts the shadows of these objects onto the blank cave wall right in front of the chained prisoners.
So, if you are one of these prisoners, you have never seen a real tree or a real dog or even another real human being. All you have ever experienced, your entire reality from the moment you drew breath, consists of these flickering, two-dimensional black and white shadows on the wall.
And when the people carrying the objects speak, the echoes bounce off the wall in front of the prisoners, so they think the shadows themselves are talking.
They would build their entire society, their science, their prestige, around observing, naming, and predicting the patterns of these shadows. The guy who remembers the shadow patterns best is considered a genius.
They mistake the shadows for absolute, unquestionable reality. This is Plato's devastating critique of the unexamined life. Most of us, he is saying, are living in the cave.
We mistake fleeting sensory experiences, the cultural norms we inherit, the opinions of the masses, the trending topics on our feeds for truth. We are obsessively focused on the illusions.
But then the allegory shifts. Let's walk through the ascent, the breaking of the chains.
Socrates asks us to imagine that one of these prisoners is suddenly, inexplicably freed. The chains are broken off. He is forced to stand up, turn his stiff neck, and look directly at the fire.
It would be excruciatingly painful. His eyes, accustomed only to the dim gloom, would be blinded by the glare of the flames.
In his confusion and pain, he would probably want to turn back to the comforting, familiar shadows, believing them to be clearer and more real than the bright, burning objects he is now being forced to look at.
Growth is painful. But he doesn't get to go back. He is dragged, struggling, resisting, and crying out up the steep, rugged, painful path out of the cave entirely. And when he finally reaches the surface, he steps into the daylight.
At first, the light of the sun is so overwhelmingly bright he can't see anything at all. He is temporarily blinded by reality. He has to acclimatize slowly.
First, he can only look at shadows on the ground and reflections of things in the water. Then his eyes adjust enough to look at the objects themselves, the trees and the flowers, and he can look at the stars and the moon at night.
And finally, his eyes adjust entirely, and he can lift his gaze and look directly at the sun itself in its own domain.
The ultimate realization.
Now, I have to ask you to break this down, because Socrates says the sun represents the form of the good. What does that actually mean? Is good a physical thing floating in this universe? Why is it represented by the celestial?
It requires a leap into Plato's theory of forms. In his philosophy, the physical world is just a flawed copy of a perfect, abstract world of ideas or forms. Just as the physical sun gives light to the visible world, allowing our eyes to see, and provides the energy that sustains biological life, the form of the good illuminates the intellectual world.
So it makes truth visible to the mind.
Exactly. It gives actual reality and truth to the abstract concepts we can know through reason, like justice, beauty, and equality. The philosopher standing in the sunlight finally realizes that the sun is the cause of the seasons, the years, and everything in the visible realm.
He recognizes that the pleasures of the mind, the contemplation of ultimate unchanging truth, are infinitely more real and satisfying than the fleeting, illusory pleasures of the appetite down in the cave.
Right.
Okay, I track with that. But here is my major concern. If this freed prisoner is up there, experiencing this ultimate transcendent truth, feeling the warmth of the sun, and realizing the absolute harmony of the universe, well, why on earth would they ever go back down into that miserable, dark, stinking cave?
Wouldn't they just want to stay in the sunlight forever, philosophizing and being happy?
Returning to the cave sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It does sound like a nightmare, and given the choice, they would certainly want to stay in the light. But this is where the harsh, demanding truth of the text comes into focus. The duty of the philosopher, the duty of the truly just person whose reason successfully rules their soul, is not self-indulgence, not even intellectual self-indulgence.
Remember the foundational rule of our macro model city.
We didn't build a city to make one particular class extraordinarily happy. We built it to make the whole city as happy and harmonious as possible. Therefore, the enlightened philosopher must go back down into the darkness.
They have to voluntarily return to the chains and the shadows.
Yes, they must descend to rule and guide the others who are still trapped. Because if the good, wise people who have seen the light refuse to govern, the city will be left to be ruled by the ignorant, by the power-hungry, by the lovers of shadows.
The ultimate punishment for a good person refusing to rule, as Socrates noted earlier, is being ruled by someone far worse. True justice requires sharing the light, descending back into the messy, confusing, often infuriating political reality to try and orient the society toward the good.
And it's incredibly dangerous to go back, isn't it? The text points out that when the philosopher returns to the cave, his eyes are now adjusted to the brilliant sun, so he is initially blind in the dark. He stumbles around.
He looks foolish when trying to debate the minutiae of the shadow puppets with the prisoners. He doesn't care about their shadow games anymore.
And if he tries to free the other prisoners, if he tries to tell them that their entire reality is a lie and drag them up to the light, they won't thank him. They will think he is crazy.
They will fight him tooth and nail to defend their illusions. They might even kill him, which is, of course, a direct, tragic historical reference to what the city of Athens actually did to Socrates himself.
A poignant and tragic reality woven right into the text. The ascent to wisdom isolates you, and returning to serve the ignorant can be lethal. But it is the necessary, unavoidable path of the truly just soul.
Which brings us to the close of this incredible, expansive journey. Let's synthesize the massive ground we've covered today. We started down in the noisy, chaotic port with Thrasymachus' cynical claim that justice is just a scam invented by the powerful.
We confronted the terrifying psychological temptation of Gaia's ring of invisibility. To solve the puzzle of human nature, we built an entire city from scratch, dividing it into producers, warriors, and philosopher kings.
We took that architectural blueprint and mapped it onto our own minds, discovering the inner chimera, the constant civil war between reason, spirit, and appetite. And finally, we climbed out of the shadowy cave into the blinding light of the good.
The answer to that nagging, persistent question, why be good, is finally clear. Justice is not a burden imposed on us by society. It is not a social contract born of fear. It is the absolute health, beauty, and well-being of the soul itself.
Injustice is a disease, an internal rebellion that makes us a slave to our lowest, most chaotic desires.
This is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener. Every single day, your own reason, your spirit, and your appetite are vying for control of the steering wheel. The deep dive reveals that true freedom isn't doing whatever you want, whenever you want, like the tyrant on the throne or the shepherd with the invisible ring.
True freedom is internal mastery. It is reason holding the reins, guiding the chariot.
And if we don't actively work to achieve that mastery, we remain prisoners in the cave, fiercely defending the shadows on the wall, completely unaware of the sunlight just above us.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. At the very end of the source text, after all the relentless logic and city building, Socrates resorts to a myth, the myth of He describes a soldier who dies in battle, but his soul travels to the afterlife and comes back to tell the tale.
He describes a cosmic 1,000-year journey where souls are punished or rewarded for their past lives, but then they reach a magnificent meadow where they are presented with a staggering choice. They must choose their next life from a scattering of lots on the ground. They can choose to be tyrants, animals, simple farmers, rich people, or athletes.
And the tragedy, Socrates notes, is that souls who lived good lives in their previous incarnations simply by habit or societal pressure, without true philosophical wisdom, often rush forward and eagerly choose the life of a wealthy, powerful tyrant, not realizing until it's too late that the life is bound with horrific tragedies and eternal torment.
Only the soul equipped with true, hard-won wisdom, the one who has painstakingly harmonized their internal state, knows how to carefully examine the lots and choose a life of moderate, lasting justice.
After they make their fateful choice, they drink from the river Liffey, the river of forgetfulness, and shoot like shooting stars into their new birth, entirely forgetting the lessons of the meadow. It leaves us with a haunting question, one that brings us right back to the very beginning. If you were standing in that meadow right now, looking down at the scattered lots with all the wisdom you've gained or neglected in this life, what kind of soul would you choose to become next?